Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the late title Tuesday played today, July 8th of the great year 2025. Now, recently I've been doing a lot of farming off stream, and I was able to boost my rating all the way up to a whopping 3,400 going into this event. Now, the all-time record is 3,408, and let's start talking about the event. Now, in Title Tuesday, in the second round, I played against a famous streamer and international master, Eric Rosen. Eric actually played a really good game at a couple of moments in the second round. I was losing, but ultimately, I was able to swindle Eric and get a win. Now, in the next 4 rounds, I would recover and get 4 wins, including a very pivotal win in the 6th round against none other than the current world number 4, Arjun Erigaisi. So, I get a big win against Arjun, and this pushes me to a score of 6 out of 6 and a rating of 3,407. So now you know what that means. That means in round number 7 with a perfect score, I'm going up against the future first American world champion, Hans Niemann. I have the white pieces, and if I am able to defeat Hans, I will set a new record on chess.com. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Now I have the white pieces. I play the move d4, Hans plays knight f6, and now I play the classic Trump house key opening with bishop to g5. Here Hans plays d5, I go e3, and now we get the move c5. I trade the bishop for the knight, I take the pawn, and now we get to move e6. Now, what is actually very funny about this opening is that in this specific title Tuesday, in 2 of my earlier rounds, I had this exact position with the white pieces. Now, in the 2 games that I had, I played c4 both times, and after takes, queen c2, queen a5, knight d2. Rasmus Savain played c3, but after takes, queen c5, and knight to e4. Very quickly, I forked the queen and the pawn, and I would go on to get a win. So I'd had this position already a couple of times in the event, but I'm playing against Hans. Now, you can say what you want about Hans, but he is obviously a very strong player, and I play this move a3 instead of c4 because I simply expect Hans to know how to react if I play the slightly dubious variation. Now, this, of course, is one of the great mind games in the game of chess, which is that the game within the game, where if you're playing someone a little bit weaker, sometimes you make an assumption they might not know the theory in a specific variation, and you can play something that's not quite right because your opponent doesn't know the exact way to respond to the move that you play. You can get an advantage. Now, somebody like Hans or Ali Reza or a top player, it doesn't quite work like that, and sometimes you have to show a little bit of respect. So I go a3, Hans takes, I play knight f3, and now we get the move knight c6. Now, the one advantage white has here is that black has the double pawns on the f file, so if I can play very quickly and open up the center of the board, maybe I can take advantage of the passive bishop on this diagonal combined with the double f pawns. So here I play the move b4. Hans drops the juicer back to e7, and now I play the move knight bd2, hoping to play for c4. However, Hans correctly plays the move e5, and it's clear that I have gone badly astray in the opening. Now, the reason I've gone badly astray is not only does black have these 2 bishops on e7 and c8, but now there's a big black center, and all the diagonals are open, so I need to be very careful. Now, in this position, I played this move bishop to e2 relatively slowly, and this is just a bad move. Now, initially, I wanted to play the move c4, but after pawn to d4 here, I thought that black has a lot of central control here. The pawns are going, the bishops are active, and I felt that there would be very limited opportunities for me to try and claim an advantage. So I play the move bishop e2, and as soon as I played this move, I realized that I had made a mistake, and Hans does not wait. He immediately slams out the move e4 here. There's your slam, everybody. He slams the move e4, and now I play the move knight g1. Now, I'd love to move my knight somewhere else, but if I go to d4 after takes, and f5, let's say I go c4, and rook to g8, castles, and f4, black is pushing p, the rook is active, the bishop is coming to h3, and I'm going to get steamrolled, and I'm not going to set a new record. Additionally, if I go to h4 here, black can play f5, the bishop guards the pawn, and now my knight is vastly astray, has gone completely astray, I should say, and is stuck on the rim. So I go knight g1. Now here Hans plays the move f5, and this was a little bit premature. It was very clear to me that Hans, who is someone who follows a lot of the online games, he knows that when I get low on time, sometimes I panic and make some mistakes, and he chooses to play this move f5 very, very prematurely in 2 seconds to try and also put pressure on the clock. Now, this move is actually a mistake here. What Hans should have played in this position is a move like castles, because black can always play f5, And this knight, if it ever goes to h3, black can simply trade and play something like f5 here. Black's threatening to push d4 or f4. There's bishop f6 here. This king on e1 is terrible, and I'm going to lose this game every single time. So Hans goes f5 instead, and now here I decide to play this move c3. Now this is a very double-edged move that I play here. I did consider the move knight to h3 as well, but after d4, black is pushing p, the center of the board is opening, and I think I'm in bad shape. So I go c3, trying to stop d4, and what I'm hoping for here is that if Hans were to play a move like bishop to e6, now I go knight to h3. Let's say black plays bishop d6, I get g3, let's say queen e7, and knight to f4. Now these knights are very active here on f4 and d4. Both knights are going to get some bastions, and white actually is not worse at all. Hans plays the move f4 relatively quickly again. This is a pawn sacrifice. It actually is the best move in the position, but one of the issues here is that after I take, instinctively, I think Hans, much like myself, he could sense that this is dangerous for white, but you have to come up with a clear-cut plan. So here Hans goes rook to g8. I play the move g3 here, guarding the pawn, and now we get the move bishop f6. Here I go rook to c1, guarding the pawn, and Hans plays bishop e6. Now I go bishop to b5, and already here the advantage is starting to slip away from black. Now it's not super obvious why the advantage is slipping away. In fact, I suspect here Hans thought he was still significantly better, but what black really needs to do here is play something like a5, trying to create the weaknesses, open the file and the diagonals immediately, because as soon as I get bishop b5 here, Hans plays queen b6, I take, he takes, and I go knight b3. Now black is struggling to push the p. You can't go d4, I cover the square with the knight, the pawn, and the queen. You can't go c5, I cover the square with the knight and the pawn. And if you ever go a5 here, I can maybe take, I don't have to, but it's at least an option. So now black can't really push the p forward here, and this gives me time to try and create a bunch of bastions with these knights. So Hans goes bishop g4, I play queen d2, we get castles, and now I play the move knight e2. Now it's very apparent to me that Hans simply underestimated what my plan was in this position. It's very easy to look at this position and think, you know what, white can get the knights here, but white's king can't castle the queen side. If white ever tries to castle the king side here after like h4 and bishop f3, it looks very, very scary. The computer, of course, laughs and says that white is better here, but from a human perspective, it feels very dangerous. So after knight to e2, Hans plays the move rook to e8, and now I play the move knight to d4. Hans goes h5, and here I play the move queen to e3. Now the computer says that were I to play the very explosive move pawn to c4, opening up the c file, white is apparently winning. But in a blitz game where I'm trying not to get too low on time, you have these moments where you have to judge, do I use time or do I move quickly? And ultimately I decide to go queen e3 simply because queen e3 stops the pawn thrust. It also guards the knight, but I have another very, very positional idea in mind, which is to move my king to the queen side manually by going to d2, c2, and maybe b2. Now around this moment, I suspect that Hans realized he was starting to get into some trouble. He plays bishop h3, and now I go king to d2. Now the reason I'm able to run with the king is that the center of the board is very clogged here. Black can't push any pawns forward, and with these bastion knights that are going to land on both c5 and d4, with black unable to push the pawns, the queen blockades, and now I'm free to bring the rook and move the king over. And at this point, positionally speaking, this is already close to loss for black. So Hans goes rook d8. Now I play the move king to c2. Idea is simply that I might want to put the rook on d1, maybe go c4, but if I ever go c4 here, after pawn takes pawn, the d file opens up. So I go king c2. Hans plays bishop d7, and now I play the move knight to c5, and you can tell here that these knights that are both bastioned are very, very well placed. My king is on c2, but because all the files are clogged here, the knights are simply much better than the bishops. So Hans goes bishop to e7, I play knight to b3, guarding the knight on c5 here, and now we get the move bishop g4. Now in this position I play the move h4, and I will say that right here I thought Hans should have played the move h4, because after h4, even if it's not the best move in the position, say I go rook g1, after takes, and rook to h8, black can at least try to pretend that he can use the h file here to create the kebab towards my king. However, Hans goes bishop g4, and now I play h4, clogging the toilet completely on the king's side. With black not having any knights or knights here, black cannot remove the queen, the knights are bashed on b3 and c5, and this is a very tough position to play. Now the irony behind this move is that the computer actually says it's a mistake because black can sack a pawn with a5 here, because if white were to take, after takes, and the move king c7, knight b3, and now rook to a8. After rook to a1 and then move bishop to e2. Very quickly, black's going to go rook b8 and bishop to d3, and I have some serious problems to deal with in the position. So Hans instead plays the move queen to b5, and now I go a4, queen b6, and after rook to b1 here, now there will never be an a5 maneuver, so it's simply a matter of bringing the towers into the game, and at the right moment, using the rooks and the knights to open either the c file or the b file. So Hans plays the move rook g6. I go rook b2, king c7, and now I play rook h to b1, double stacking on the b file here, as my idea is to play b5, or to take with the pawn. For example, I can take and open up this file for the double stack. If white doesn't take, as we'll see in the game, my intention is to play b5 at some moment and force open the file. So we get the move rook to b8. Now I play the move knight to d4. Hans plays king to d8, and here I play the move a5. Now Hans is obviously in a lot of trouble here. It's a very tough position to play, so he's trying to move quickly, but to make matters worse, I'm the one with more time. You can see I have 38 seconds versus 14. So really the only key here for me is to get these knights placed perfectly, and then at the right moment play either b5 or c4. Now here Hans goes king to d8. This simply loses on the spot, but it's already very tough to play. After say king to c8, for example, I can play queen to e1 with ideas like queen to f1. I also have a5 once again. And after queen to d8, it feels like there should be some way to play b5. Maybe there isn't an obvious instant win here, but it's still very hard to play for black. But Hans goes to d8, and now I play the move a5, and suddenly these knights cover some very critical squares here. Queen can't go up, queen can't go over, queen can't go back. The only square for the queen is on c7, but now I play knight to a6, forking the queen and the rook. Hans goes queen to b7, I trade, and now I play the move b5 here, and the masterpiece is more or less complete as I'm forcing open this b file for the two towers. Hans plays queen c7. If he were to go c5 trying to keep the file closed, I simply play knight c6 check. Black has to sack the rook, and now the towers infiltrate, and black will lose very soon. So Hans plays queen c7. I take the pawn, he sacks the rook. Really the only try. If black goes king e8, there are 20 ways to win here. Even queen takes a7 is good enough, because after takes, and b6 here, I'm simply pushing my p up the board here with the 2p. The rook is stuck guarding the pawns, and this is GG, why not? So Hans sacks the rook, but now with a double stack on the file, it's basically over. We get queen takes pawn, I check, Hans blocks, I take the juicer, and now we get to move bishop to d6, and here I play the move queen to b6, checking the king and attacking the queen at the same time. Hans plays queen b6 and then resigns the game. It could have continued. Basically, when Hans took, I was actually thinking about whether I wanted to sack the rook and play this endgame with the rook versus the bishop, or whether I simply wanted to play rook takes queen, giving up this rook. But after rook to b4 here, you'll notice that black has no passed pawns. All the squares are covered. I have an outside pawn, and quite simply what I will do is I will simply bring my king to the center of the board, and at the right moment either take the pawn or play something like rook b6. The rook can go over the board. I've got the passed pawn here. Black has no counterplay. It's simply over. So that is why Hans plays queen takes b6, but ultimately decides to resign before I play my next move. And with this victory, it takes me to a score of 7 out of 7 in Title Tuesday. But more importantly, I have now broken my own all-time record, and the new record is 34-12. So I'm on 7 out of 7, and now we head into round number 8. And in round 8, I am playing against the talented American player Jeffrey Zhang, also on a perfect score of 7 out of 7. If I win this game, I will push the record even higher. However, I have the black pieces, and Jeffrey plays move d4. I go d5, we get to move c4, and now I play the move e6. Excuse me, you guys. Let's keep going. Jeffrey plays knight to f3, and now I play the move c5. Now this is what is known as the trash defense here. You put these pawns on d5 and c5. It's named after the famous German doctor Siegbert Trash, and now we get to move pawn takes pawn. Here I take, we get to move g3, I play knight c6, bishop g2, and now I play the move knight to f6. Now all of this is very standard theory so far. We get to move castles, I play bishop to e7, takes, and now we get to move queen c2. Now again, this is an opening that's been around for almost actually more than 100 years, I would say at this point. It's considered very fundamentally solid. However, white tries to go after this pawn in the center very, very quickly. So I play bishop b6. Jeffrey plays knight c3, and now I play the move h6 to stop white from putting the bishop on g5. Were I to castle after bishop to g5, let's say I go bishop e6 and rook a d1, it's a very tough position to play here because there's massive pressure on the pawn. There's a pin from the bishop to the queen here, and I just don't like what's going on. Now, in a classical game, this would be completely fine, but in a blitz game where you don't have a ton of time to think, I'm going to have to spend 30 or 40 seconds probably on an individual move, and if I make even one mistake, I'm just going to lose with no hope. So I go h6 to stop the pin with bishop to g5. Jeffrey plays knight a4. I keep the bishop on the board here. If I were to castle after rook to d1 here, and let's say bishop e6 takes, and bishop e3, say queen d8, knight d4, white is much better with the two b's, but more importantly, there's this very weak pawn, the blockaded, isolated pawn, and white is just much better. But more importantly, there are going to be very limited opportunities for me to swindle Jeffrey and get a win. I'm probably just going to end up much worse. If I'm lucky, I draw. If I'm unlucky, I lose the game. So I go bishop c7. Jeffrey plays rook d1, I castle, we get bishop e3, and now I play the move rook to e8, trying to put pressure on both the bishop and the pawn behind him. Now in this position, Jeffrey makes a huge blunder with this move h3. This is simply a lazy move. Jeffrey's trying to play very quickly to get me to think here. h3 has some merit from the standpoint that it stops me from putting my knight on g4 to target the bishop, but this is simply a blunder. Now, if Jeffrey had played a move like rook to c1, for example, if I do go knight g4 attacking the bishop, white can simply move the bishop to c5 here, followed up by knight to c3, and there's massive pressure on the d file. But Jeffrey plays h3. Now I play the move bishop takes g3, and I think that Jeffrey has made a huge blunder here because if white takes the bishop, I take the bishop on e3, and I'm simply up a juicer. The funny thing is the computer actually agrees with the famous international master Levi Roseman. It prefers that I sack the rook with rook takes bishop because after takes, queen to d6 and g4 here, black can play h5, and with the double A battery combined with another bishop on this diagonal, apparently black is completely winning. A sample line is g5 here, and now I sack the pony with queen g3. If white takes the pony, there's bishop takes h3, and after knight to e1 here, I can go queen h2. If white goes king to f1, I have bishop to g3, and mate on h1 is unstoppable pretty much. If you move the knight, it's checkmate on g2. If you move, say, the rook, take the pawn, there's queen h1, king gets stuck due to the pin. If white goes king f2, I have bishop g3 check, king f3, and now I simply go bishop g4, checkmating the king on f3, and the game ends right here. So rook takes e3 would have been a crushing move, but again, I'm trying not to spend too long. You have these moments where you just spend a lot of time, find the right move, or spend a lot of time, don't make the right move, and I figure it's just a free pawn. So let's take the pawn. Jeffrey takes the bishop, I take his bishop, he goes knight c3, and now I play the move d4. Now in this position, I use 40 seconds before playing this move, primarily because I'm up a pawn here, but I know that the position is simplified enough that if I can find a good concrete idea, I will have great chance to win, and Jeffrey gets nothing. So I go d4 here, trying to target the pony and put more pressure on this pawn on e2. Jeffrey plays queen d2, I go queen b6, knight a4, queen a6, knight c5, queen b6, and now Jeffrey rather surprisingly plays the move rook c1. Now I expected Jeffrey to go back to a4 here. As you'll notice, I'm down a minute on the clock here. My intention was to play queen c7 in this position to pressure the pawn on g3, but I was definitely surprised when Jeffrey played rook c1 here rather than offering the repetition with knight a4. But the issue here, of course, is that I'm down 1 minute on the clock, 57 seconds versus 1 minute 55. I'm going to need to be precise. Now, this, of course, is the age-old issue when you do play Blitz online. Where do you use your time? When do you move quickly? Is this position good enough to where I can play with a couple seconds on the clock and simply win? Well, let's find out. So I go knight to e4 here. Now, of course, the computer says it's a terrible move here, but I really thought from a human standpoint, it's very logical. Obviously, my name is not Stockfish. I can't play a perfect game. And playing a move like bishop takes h3, and apparently rook e8 is ridiculous. No human would sack a bishop just to play rook e8. This is one of the stupider things I've seen in a while. Or to play something like queen to c7, hitting the pawn. Now, nothing wrong with queen c7, but there's a pin on the file. There's knight takes pawn on d4. White has access here. It looks very hard to play. So I go knight e4. Jeffrey trades, and now I'm much happier because in this position, I remain up a pawn in the center, but more importantly, it's limited material, so I should be able to develop this bishop to e6 or d7, bring the last piece into the game, and the rest should be pretty straightforward. So Jeffrey goes king h2. I play bishop to e6 here. We get the move knight to g5. Initially, I wanted to play bishop to f5, but this I thought would be a huge error because white can sack the rook with rook takes knight, and after takes and knight takes d4, suddenly the diagonal opens, the knight forks the bishop and the pawn, and even though black is so much better after a move like rook e8, this is starting to spiral to a situation where I don't know if I could play it very well with such limited time. So I go bishop to e6 instead, trying to bring my other rook into the game, and now we get to move knight to g5. Now the funny thing is the computer here still likes rook takes knight, and after takes, knight d4, rook e5, knight takes c6. Apparently rook to h5 is winning, so if there's knight e7, you go king f8, bishop takes a8, and now you have queen f2 checking the king, and after bishop g2, rook takes h3 ends the game. Even this tactic, I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure I would have been able to find this in the game. But instead we get knight g5. Now I go rook to e3. Jeffrey goes back to f3 here. Probably he should have taken, but after rook takes knight, even though I'm down 50 seconds on the clock here, I'm angling for the double stack to pressure the pawn on e2, and it's very easy to play. So Jeffrey goes knight f3. This hangs the pawn on e2. Now I'm up 2 pawns here. Jeffrey plays the move b4, bishop b3, and we get knight takes d4. Here I take with the queen, not with the knight, of course, because after queen takes e3, I lose the rook and the game. So I go queen takes knight, we get the trade, I take e2, and Jeffrey plays king g1. I go rook b8, and Jeffrey plays rook c7, and now I play the move bishop to e6. Now this move is a severe error on my part. What I should have played here was the move b5, because after takes, and this move bishop to c4, now I get this nice outpost for the bishop, and I can always target the pawn on b2. Mind you, I'm only up 1 pawn here with this extra f pawn, but the computer thinks it's winning because of this great kebab on the second rank, the rook on e2 that cuts off the white king. But like a normal human, I go bishop to e6 because I figure that now if white takes the pawn on b7, the pawn on h3 will hang. Fortunately for me, Jeffrey thinks the same way, and he plays the move g4. Now, apparently here, bishop takes b7 would be okay for white, because after bishop takes h3, white has bishop to f3, attacking the rook, and now the rook attacks the pawn. If I go rook to a2 here, there's now bishop to d5, and after check, king h2, suddenly with the weaknesses on the 7th rank here, I'm not even better. Say I play bishop e6, after takes, and rook d7, the game is going to end in a draw. But Jeffrey goes g4. Of course, we're both relatively low on time. Normal move. And now I play the move rook b2. Now, this is a move that I was very proud of because I play this move in a couple of seconds, and it sets up a very nice tactic here if white takes the pawn. Now, Jeffrey doesn't really have a choice here. Playing a move like h4 doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He decides to go bishop takes pawn, and now I play the move pawn to a5 here, attacking the pawn on b4. Now, one thing I want to point out is that if Jeffrey were to play rook takes b7 here, this would lose on the spot because I can sack the rook with rook takes bishop, checking the king, and after takes, I'm up a bishop, and there's no ice skater here because I've created the Lufthansa for the king on h7. However, were I to play the other order with takes, and a5, this is a serious error because white has bishop to e4 here. And now, of course, unlike this position where you hang the bishop's no longer under attack. The problem is if I take this pawn on b4, there's rook to d8, and now the king gets stuck. I get checkmated, and I lose the game. And if I play g6, for example, to stop the checkmate threat, now white takes the pawn on a5, and white draws the game. So it's very vital that I have this move rook takes g2 here because otherwise it would not be clear at all. Jeffrey takes, I go a5 here. Now you'll notice the 2 rooks target the bishop, the rook and the pawn target this pawn. Jeffrey plays b5 here. If he were to take, rook takes b7 ends the game. So white's going to lose this pawn one way or another. Jeffrey goes b5, I take, and here he decides to resign the game, probably because after bishop to g2, for example, I can simply go rook to b1, king h2, and I have rook 8 to b2. There are no ice skater mates, and with this pin on the second rank and potentially the rook going to g1, say king g3, rook g1, for example, white is just lost here. I have 2 extra pawns. It should be winning. I was a little surprised that Jeffrey resigned at the time, but nonetheless, he decides to end the game right here after rook takes b5. So with this win, I go to a perfect score of 8 out of 8, and I up the all-time record to 34-16. Now, in round number 9, I would go for glory. I would have a very topsy-turvy game against Alireza Firouzja. There were moments where I was much better. Ultimately, in the time scramble, Alireza simply was better than me with seconds on the clock. He would outplay me and get a win, meaning that the record would be fixed at 34-16. So After round number 9 and losing to Ali Reza, I would draw in round 10 against Alexander Indijic from Serbia before winning another very tense game in round number 11 against Ivan Yeletsky from Russia. With that, I would score 9.5 points out of 11, and I would get my first Title Tuesday victory since April 29th, which was nearly 2.5 months ago. So I get my first win in Title Tuesday, I set a new record, and all's well that ends well for me. Of course, you're probably wondering, well, with that loss and that draw, where did my rating end up? Well, my rating ended up right back at 3,400, which is where I started in Title Tuesday. If I'm going to score 9.5 points out of 11 and gain 0 rating points, it shows just how hard it is to maintain such a level. So, on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the late Title Tuesday, today, July 8th of the great year 2025. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back with a great recap and content in the very near future. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.